Love is the first and most essential bond, but it's also the invisible thread, woven with time, attention, and tenderness through consistent nurturing relationships.
The words lasted only seconds, but their impact tore through the monarchy like a warning bell. Duchess Sophie, standing before senior royal aides after a tense Commonwealth reception, did not praise Catherine politely or hide behind ceremonial language. She delivered a direct verdict. Catherine is the woman our royal family trusts. The room fell silent. Charles stopped moving. Camilla's expression hardened, and William realized Sophie had just spoken aloud what the palace had spent months refusing to admit. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Sophie had spoken at the end of a private reception briefing inside St. James's Palace. A reception briefing was a closed discussion where senior royals and aides reviewed what had happened during an official gathering and decided how the crown should respond. Charles, Camilla, William, Edward, and several trusted officials were still present when an advisor asked whether Catherine remained central to the monarchy's future. The trusted confidant did not hesitate. She answered, "Catherine is the woman our royal family trusts." That single word changed the atmosphere. Sophie had not called the princess popular, dutiful, or respected. She had chosen trust, a word carrying far greater weight inside a family divided by resentment, competing households, and doubt over who could represent the crown without creating another crisis. Praise could be ceremonial. Trust could not. Charles slowly lowered the briefing paper in his hand and looked toward Sophie. The king understood that her statement honored Catherine, but it also judged everyone who no longer inspired the same confidence. He said nothing, yet his silence revealed that the message had landed. Camilla remained seated while others shifted around her. The queen consort tightened her fingers around the chair's arm as she realized another royal woman had been named the family's emotional center while she was present. Sophie had not removed her title, but she had exposed the limits of what that title could guarantee. William watched Anne closely. The Princess Royal showed no surprise. She gave Sophie a restrained nod, suggesting the declaration reflected more than one woman's sudden courage. Some understanding had already formed behind closed doors. The prince quietly asked whether Catherine had approved the statement. Sophie answered that his wife had requested no public defense. That made the declaration more powerful. It had not been staged, written, or demanded. It had been freely given. Minutes later, Charles instructed an aide to keep Sophie, William, and Camilla behind after the room cleared. Edward glanced toward his wife, but she remained composed. The confrontation had already begun. As the final aide closed the doors, Sophie understood that the palace no longer wanted an explanation of what she had said. It wanted to know why she had chosen that moment to say it. Behind the titles and formal smiles, Sophie's declaration struck 5 people in 5 very different ways. For Catherine, it offered protection she had never requested. For William, it confirmed a loyalty he could not openly demand. For Charles, it threatened the fragile balance of his household. For Camilla, it sounded like exclusion disguised as admiration. And for Sophie herself, it marked the moment she stopped acting as a silent mediator and chose, at last, to take a side. Sophie had spent years moving carefully between royal households. The Duchess maintained Charles's confidence, supported Catherine during periods of intense pressure, and worked closely with Anne without appearing tied to any faction. A royal household was the private office and staff supporting an individual senior royal. Her unusual position mattered because she understood where loyalties overlapped, where resentments remained hidden, and which silences were becoming dangerous. Catherine had become increasingly cautious about those hidden battles. The princess knew every compliment could be interpreted as ambition, every absence as weakness, and every public success as a threat to someone else's authority. Sophie's defense, therefore, carried both comfort and danger. It protected her character while placing her directly inside a conflict she had tried to avoid. William felt the same contradiction. The prince was relieved that someone had defended his wife without being asked, yet alarmed by the force of the declaration. He knew Catherine would never want trust turned into a weapon against Camilla. Still, hearing Sophie say the words aloud confirmed something he had long believed but could not publicly demand. Camilla felt comparison closing around her again. The queen consort had spent years resisting the idea that another royal woman's popularity weakened her own position. Sophie's language reopened her deepest insecurity. Acceptance of her title appeared conditional, while confidence in Catherine seemed natural, effortless, and unquestioned. Edward found his wife in a quiet corridor after the briefing. The Duke asked whether she understood what she had started. Sophie removed her gloves, folded them carefully, and answered that the family had delayed the truth for too long. The trusted confidant then reminded him that Charles had previously urged senior royals to avoid statements elevating one household above another. The king wanted restraint, because public comparisons could fracture the family. By speaking anyway, Sophie had knowingly crossed a boundary set by the sovereign. Catherine received the news at Adelaide Cottage through a handwritten note from William. She read Sophie's exact words twice, placed the message beside her untouched tea, and asked only, "What happened before she said it?" Catherine's question exposed the real mystery, because Sophie's declaration had not been born in that reception room. It had begun weeks earlier, during one private ceremony that changed the family's loyalties forever. The palace would later describe Sophie's words as spontaneous, but the truth began 3 weeks earlier in the Queen's private chapel at Windsor. What was meant to be a quiet memorial ceremony became the moment several royals saw Catherine differently and saw Camilla's influence more clearly than ever before. There were no cameras, no public speeches, and no official record of what followed. Yet one request, one refusal, and one unexpected act of compassion transformed private discomfort into permanent division. Camilla had asked that Catherine surrender the final reading only minutes before the service began. The queen consort argued that precedence required the monarch's wife to close the ceremony. Precedence was the formal ranking that determines where royals stand, sit, or speak during official occasions. Yet the passage had been personally selected for Catherine by Elizabeth II years earlier, and carried a private meaning rooted in duty, endurance, and service without recognition. Catherine received the request without protest. The princess closed the small prayer book, handed it to the chaplain, and said she would not allow a memorial to become a dispute over status. Her restraint protected the ceremony, but it also exposed the cost of always choosing peace. She had prepared the reading privately as a promise to the late monarch, and surrendering it meant giving up something deeply personal without being allowed to explain why it mattered. Sophie watched everything. The trusted confidant did not feel anger because Catherine had lost a place at the lectern. She felt it because the princess's instinct to avoid conflict had been used against her. Camilla moved forward, believing the matter settled, while Sophie understood that silence had once again been mistaken for weakness. Anne changed the course of the service before the reading began. The Princess Royal rose and told the chaplain that Elizabeth's written instruction must be honored. A written order was a direct recorded instruction carrying the authority of the person who issued it. The chapel fell silent. Charles looked from his sister to his wife and realized the disagreement could no longer remain hidden. Catherine then made the choice no one expected. Rather than reclaiming the passage and allowing Camilla to suffer a direct defeat, she asked Sophie to deliver it instead. The gesture preserved Elizabeth's intention while sparing the queen consort public humiliation. In that moment, Sophie saw authority without cruelty. After the ceremony, the Duchess found Catherine alone near the cloister door and said, "Your silence will not always be mistaken for surrender." The princess asked her not to intervene, but Sophie had already made her decision. 3 weeks later, with the memory of the chapel still burning beneath her composure, Sophie entered the closed palace meeting, prepared to defend not merely a statement, but the woman whose restraint had exposed everyone else. The doors closed, the aides disappeared, and ceremony gave way to raw family conflict. Charles stood at the head of the long table. Camilla remained beside him, rigid and watchful. William took a place near the window, saying nothing. Sophie faced all three without notes, advisors, or protection. The king offered her one chance to soften the statement. Instead, she repeated it more slowly and added a second sentence that made the confrontation far more dangerous than anyone expected. Charles asked whether Sophie wished to clarify that she had referred only to Catherine's charitable work. The Duchess refused the escape he offered. She said she meant trust in its broadest possible sense: personal, institutional, and moral. Institutional trust meant confidence that someone would protect the monarchy's stability rather than use its power for private advantage. Her answer turned praise into judgment. Camilla challenged her immediately. The queen consort asked what authority Sophie possessed to speak for the entire family. Loyalty to the crown, she warned, required discipline, and personal admiration could not become a public verdict on senior royals. The trusted confidant listened without lowering her eyes. Sophie then named the wound beneath the dispute. Discipline, she said, had too often meant asking Catherine to absorb insults quietly so that others would not feel exposed. The princess had protected family unity by remaining silent, while the people benefiting from that restraint offered little protection in return. William pressed one hand against the back of an empty chair. The prince had promised his wife that he would not turn Sophie's declaration into another household war. Yet hearing someone defend Catherine with such clarity made silence almost unbearable. He remained still, but Camilla noticed the tension in his hand. Charles placed his pen on the table. The king said the palace could issue a correction within the hour, limiting the remark to charitable service and ending the dispute before it spread. Sophie looked directly at him and refused. A correction, she said, would transform an honest declaration into an act of cowardice. Then came the second sentence. Sophie told Charles that Catherine was trusted because she never used another person's vulnerability to enlarge her own position. The meaning struck instantly. Camilla pushed back her chair with enough force for it to scrape against the floor. The queen consort demanded an apology, accusing the Duchess of disguising a personal attack as moral courage. William finally stepped away from the window. Before anyone demanded apologies, he said, the family needed to discuss what had happened inside the Windsor Chapel. The confrontation had begun over a sentence spoken at St. James's, but William's intervention dragged the family toward the ceremony they had all agreed never to discuss again. Sophie had spoken alone, but she was no longer standing alone. As the argument widened, Charles discovered that the Duchess's statement reflected a deeper shift among the senior royals. Anne had preserved the chapel record. Edward had seen the private correspondence. William knew how often Catherine had been asked to surrender ground. Even palace staff had begun routing sensitive family matters toward the princess. What looked like one woman's declaration was actually the visible edge of a quiet and powerful alliance. Anne entered after William requested her presence. The Princess Royal offered no greeting and carried no folder. She simply confirmed that Sophie's judgment reflected her own. Catherine had become the person senior relatives approached when a matter required honesty without humiliation. That trust was no longer emotional alone. It had become operational, meaning it now shaped how difficult family problems were quietly handled. Senior aides had increasingly asked Catherine to speak with younger royals, strained relatives, and charitable leaders, frightened that a disagreement with one household might damage their work. The princess listened before advising, protected confidence, and refused to turn private weakness into influence. Sophie had witnessed that restraint repeatedly. William had watched his wife absorb the pressure without demanding recognition. Charles felt the meaning settle heavily. The king was not angry that Catherine had helped. He was wounded because his family had begun seeing her as the safest person to approach when they feared his own household might complicate matters. Authority had not been taken from him by rebellion. It had quietly moved toward the person others trusted not to misuse it. Charles asked Anne why she had never raised these concerns privately. She answered that she had more than once. Her warnings had been softened, delayed, or redirected until silence became more useful to the palace than truth. The monarch looked away because he recognized the pattern. Messages intended to protect him had also prevented him from understanding what his family feared. Edward arrived carrying a sealed memorandum written after the Windsor Chapel ceremony. A memorandum was a short internal record preserving important instructions or decisions. The note documented Catherine's request that no blame be placed on Camilla and that the disagreement never be used to embarrass Charles. Sophie explained that this was why she had finally spoken. Catherine had preserved the king's dignity, shielded the queen consort from humiliation, and asked William not to retaliate. Yet no one had formally acknowledged what the princess surrendered. Charles read the note twice. Then he ordered a confidential review of every sensitive family decision made during the previous 6 months. Camilla understood immediately that the inquiry would reach far beyond the chapel. The declaration was no longer merely an emotional defense of Catherine. It had become the key that unlocked a record of decisions the palace had hoped would remain scattered, private, and impossible to connect. By the following morning, Sophie's words had traveled through every royal household. Meetings were postponed. Briefings were rewritten. Courtiers who had once treated Catherine's restraint as convenient began describing it as leadership. Yet the change brought no celebration. Charles faced the possibility that his own family trusted another household more than his. Camilla watched long-standing assurances begin to weaken, and Sophie discovered that speaking the truth had not ended the conflict. It had forced everyone to reveal where they truly stood. Charles's review immediately paused several joint initiatives that had placed Camilla's advisors in direct control of projects involving Catherine, Sophie, and Anne. The palace described the suspension as a matter of administrative clarity. Administrative clarity meant establishing exactly who held authority and who had approved each instruction. No one believed the timing was accidental. Influence that had once moved quietly between offices was now being examined line by line. Staff members responded by demanding written approval before carrying out instructions crossing from one royal household into another. The change slowed ordinary work and exposed old habits. Charles's team felt challenged. Camilla's office felt watched. What had previously depended on personal access now required a record, and every new signature threatened to reveal how much power had operated without formal permission. Camilla received the consequences at breakfast. An aide informed the queen consort that a strategy session with Catherine's foundation had been cancelled pending review. She dismissed the room, remained seated alone, and folded the cancellation notice into smaller squares until the paper could barely be opened again. The loss was not ceremonial. It meant her office could no longer shape a project connected to the woman Sophie had named as the family's most trusted figure. Edward confronted his wife privately. The Duke warned that she had placed herself in direct conflict with the sovereign's household. Sophie admitted she was frightened. Still, the trusted confidant said fear was no longer a good enough reason to leave Catherine undefended. Edward heard the strain in her voice, but he also understood that she would not retreat. The pressure deepened when one of Camilla's long-serving advisors submitted a private resignation after being ordered to provide records of informal instructions sent across the family. The departure suggested the review had already uncovered conduct few wanted examined. William then found the most damaging entry. A briefing file showed that Camilla's office had supported a new family representation plan, giving Catherine ceremonial duties while restricting her access to internal strategy meetings. The prince read the paragraph twice before closing the file. Catherine refused retaliation when he called. She asked William to come home without aids, papers, or anger. While the palace prepared for punishment and counterattack, Catherine was waiting in private, with a decision that would change the meaning of Sophie's statement entirely. There were no courtiers in the room, no briefing papers on the table, and no cameras waiting beyond the door. Catherine sat opposite William as a wife, not a future queen. He arrived prepared to defend her, expose the hidden plan, and demand consequences. She listened until his anger ran out. Then she told him that Sophie's statement would mean nothing if it became a weapon against another woman. In that quiet moment, Catherine proved exactly why the family trusted her. William returned to Adelaide Cottage carrying the palace file, but Catherine did not reach for it. She had placed Sophie's handwritten message on the table and left the larger documents untouched. The prince began speaking before he sat down. He explained that the proposed representation plan could have reduced her influence for years while preserving the appearance of royal unity. A representation plan was an internal arrangement deciding which family members would attend ceremonies, speak publicly, and help shape strategy. Silence, he warned, would only allow the same control to return under a different name. Catherine listened until his anger gave way to exhaustion. Then the princess admitted that the chapel incident had hurt more deeply than she had shown. She had never cared about reading last or standing closest to the altar. What wounded her was being treated like an obstacle that had to be moved so someone else could feel secure. She had chosen peace, but peace had come at the cost of being misunderstood. William's control finally weakened. He confessed that watching her protect the family had begun to feel like watching the institution consume her kindness. The future king no longer knew whether patience was preserving harmony or rewarding cruelty. His voice broke because his desire to defend her had collided with the promise he had made not to turn her suffering into another royal war. Catherine refused to demand Camilla's removal. Instead, she asked for a formal agreement defining the authority of every household. She wanted written boundaries, clear approval, and an end to private interference. She wanted accountability without humiliation. The princess then explained the true meaning of Sophie's declaration. Trust was not proven by defeating people at their weakest. It was proven by holding enough power to retaliate and choosing to create a safer system for everyone, including those who had caused the pain. William understood. That evening, he contacted Charles and requested one private family meeting involving the king, Camilla, Sophie, Anne, and Catherine. No aides would attend. No statement would be drafted beforehand. Catherine had rejected revenge, but mercy would now require something harder from every person in the room. An honest admission of what they had done, what they feared, and whom they truly trusted. Before the family could meet, Sophie's declaration escaped the palace walls and became the sentence Britain could not stop repeating. Broadcasters debated whether it was praise, warning, or succession message. Newspapers placed Catherine's face beside the word trust. Crowds gathered outside royal residences carrying flowers and handwritten notes. Yet the most powerful public reaction came not from experts or commentators, but from one quiet moment at Windsor that captured exactly why Sophie's words had struck so deeply. Morning programs replayed the statement again and again. Constitutional commentators, experts, who explain how the monarchy operates within public life, examined every word. Their focus was not Catherine's popularity alone. They wanted to know why Sophie, a senior royal known for restraint, had identified one woman as the person the family trusted most. The choice suggested that confidence inside the monarchy had become unequal. Charles's press office considered a response, declaring that every senior royal remained equally valued. The draft never left the room. Advisors recognized that its defensive tone would strengthen the impression of division and turn Sophie's words into an official crisis. Silence felt dangerous, but denial looked worse. Sophie unfolded the morning newspaper at Bagshot Park and found Catherine beneath the headline, "The Woman They Trust." The Duchess did not look triumphant. She told Edward that she had wanted honesty, not a public contest between two women. The Duke reminded her that once private truth entered public debate, no one could control how it would be used. Catherine felt that danger immediately. She watched the coverage with William and worried that public affection for her would deepen Camilla's humiliation. The princess instructed her team not to celebrate the headlines and rejected suggestions for a staged appearance. William understood her caution, though he also knew silence would not stop the country from drawing conclusions. By late afternoon, hundreds had gathered near Windsor's Long Walk. Many carried white flowers. One handwritten sign read, "Kindness is strength." The message was photographed beside the castle gates and spread across broadcasts because it transformed a royal dispute into a simple public verdict. Catherine's car passed the crowd unexpectedly. She asked the driver to slow, lowered the window, pressed one hand briefly to her heart, and nodded toward the sign without speaking. The crowd fell quiet, then erupted into applause. Her restraint communicated more than any prepared speech. Charles watched the footage alone that evening. The king turned off the television, called his private secretary, and confirmed that the meeting would proceed without advisors, statements, or excuses. The public had already decided what Sophie's words meant, but inside Windsor, the family still had to deliver its own verdict, and this time, Catherine would be present to hear it. The final meeting began without ceremony. Charles entered first, followed by Camilla, Anne, Sophie, William, and Catherine. No one sat at the head of the table. There were no secretaries recording the exchange, and no advisors shaping the language. For once, the monarchy's future would not be decided through precedents, whispered instructions, or strategic silence. It would be decided by 6 people confronting the truth behind one sentence. Catherine had become the woman they trusted because she had never demanded that trust. Charles spoke before anyone else could retreat behind formality. The king admitted that Sophie's declaration had angered him because it exposed a failure he had resisted seeing. His family had increasingly turned toward Catherine whenever they needed fairness, privacy, and calm judgment. They had not chosen the princess because she demanded authority. They trusted her because she handled influence without using another person's weakness against them. Charles then approved written boundaries between the royal households. A royal household was the private office and staff supporting an individual senior family member. No office would again control another royal's charitable strategy, ceremonial duties, or internal work without direct consent. Anne, Sophie, and Catherine would each hold clearly defined authority over their own responsibilities, ending the quiet interference that had allowed resentment to grow. Camilla finally confronted the fear beneath her decisions. The queen consort admitted that her request inside the Windsor chapel had come from anxiety about appearing secondary within her own family. Catherine's calm surrender had made that insecurity worse, not better, because it exposed the difference between possessing rank and earning respect. She had tried to strengthen her position, yet the attempt had revealed how uncertain she still felt inside it. Catherine answered without triumph. The princess told Camilla that she did not want her defeated, removed, or publicly humiliated. She wanted only the freedom to serve without being treated as a threat. Her restraint allowed accountability without cruelty, and for the first time, the comparison between the two women began to lose its power. Sophie then explained her intention. The Duchess had never declared Catherine perfect, untouchable, or more important than everyone else. She had called her trustworthy because the future queen protected people, even when they failed to protect her. Charles confirmed that Catherine would now participate fully in family strategy meetings involving the next generation and the monarchy's long-term direction. William accepted the decision with quiet relief. Anne supported it without hesitation. Camilla gave her consent. Before leaving, Sophie took Catherine's hand and repeated the statement privately. No one challenged her. And when the doors finally opened, the family emerged not because every wound had vanished, but because they had at last agreed on the woman whose character could lead them beyond those wounds. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.